For level 1, we need to review and introduce some new vocabulary. A polynomial is just the sum or difference of terms, so terms that are being added or subtracted together. A degree is the highest exponent. We need to remind ourselves that a polynomial cannot have negative exponents or rational, meaning a fraction or decimal exponents. It can't have variables in the denominator. It can't have variables in a radical or a square root symbol as well. So I have a couple of examples for what a polynomial could look like listed, and then I have some examples for what a polynomial does not look like. The issue that we have with the non-examples is that I have a negative exponent here, so it's not a polynomial. I have variables under the radical here, so it's not a polynomial. And then I have a variable in the denominator here, which makes this not a polynomial. Now there are types of polynomials. We can classify them based off of how many terms there are. And we're going to use the imagery of the different wheels on a cycle. If there's one wheel, we can call that a unicycle or a monocycle. One wheel, monocycle, monomial, has one term. A bicycle has two wheels. A binomial has two terms. Then we have a tricycle that has three wheels, and a trinomial then would have three terms. So remembering mono, bi, and tri can help me remember there are 1, 2, and 3 terms in a monomial, binomial, and trinomial. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example with those. So which choice correctly describes the order of the polynomials shown? We have two terms here, one term here, one term here. I know that there are two terms because they're separated by addition and subtraction symbols. So that would make this a binomial. There are three terms here because they're separated by addition and subtraction symbols. So that makes this a trinomial. And there's just one term here because there are no addition or subtraction symbols. So that makes this a monomial. So binomial, trinomial, monomial, that would be C. Binomial, trinomial, monomial. Now, how do we actually add together different polynomials or subtract different polynomials? We do that by using something that we learned last year called combining like terms. So we are going to line up our like terms, and remember like terms have to have the same variables with the same exponents. So we'll line up our like terms, one underneath the other, and can add those or subtract those together. And that will leave us with our new polynomial. So in example 1, level 1 and level 2 are kind of combined together here. Remember, because a level 1 just says that you can add or subtract this kind of polynomial. And when we are adding and subtracting, I want you guys to remember back to elementary school when you learned how to add and subtract big numbers. You had to line up your place values, and then you added all the ones together, all of the tens together, all the hundreds together, and so on. That's what we're going to do here. We have our first polynomial, so we'll write it out, 6a squared. Then we have a 2a is the next term. And then finally we have 9 in our final term. And then the next polynomial, we're going to line it up underneath the corresponding like terms. So 2a squared would go underneath our 6a squared. Negative a would go underneath our 2a. And 3 would go underneath the 9. Now it's time to actually add or subtract, whatever the problem is asking. In this case, it's adding. So we are going to add by putting an addition sign in front of each term in the second row. We'll have 9 plus 3 gives me 12. 2a's plus negative 1a. Remember, when there's not a number written, we write it as a 1. 2a plus negative 1a gives me 1a. The 1 is optional. 6a squared plus 2 more a squareds gives me 8a squared. Notice how none of the exponents changed. A squareds all remained as a squareds, a's remained as a's. And that's because when you're adding and subtracting, you're just counting how many there are. You're not actually changing any exponents. So you can think of it like a unit. I have 4 pens plus 3 pens gives me 7 pens. So 6a squareds plus 2a squareds gives me a total of 8a squareds. Now the next thing that we need to do is make sure that it looks like a polynomial. Remember, I have 3 separate terms here that I combined together. And terms are separated by addition and subtraction signs. So if you don't see a symbol separating your terms, you're going to put an addition sign. And there's my answer, 8a squared plus a plus 12. Example 1b, we have 2b squared, 7b, and then 4. In the next polynomial, we have a b squared, so it'll go underneath our b squared term. Negative 9b will go underneath our b term. And then 1 will go underneath the 4. We are adding these together, so we'll write an addition sign in front of each of my second row terms. 4 plus 1 gives me 5. 7b plus negative 9b gives me negative 2b. And then 2b squared plus 1b squared gives me 3b squareds. I already have a sign in between these two terms. I just need to put a sign in between my last two terms. Let's take a look at what subtraction looks like. We have 3c cubed. And then there's a 7c. In the next polynomial, 8c cubed would need to be lined up underneath our previous c cubed term, and then 4c is going to go underneath our c term. We are subtracting this time, so where a subtraction sign is going to go in front of each of the symbols. So we'll have 7c minus 4c gives me 3c. 3c cubed minus 8c cubed gives me negative 5c cubed. We don't have a symbol in between here, so we'll need to put our own plus sign. Our last example here for level 1 and 2, 3d squared is our first term. Negative 7d is our second term. 5 is the third term. And in the next polynomial, I have negative d squared will need to be lined up underneath the d squared term. 5d will need to go underneath my d term. And then 2 will go underneath of my constant. This problem is asking us to subtract, so we'll write a subtraction symbol next to each of these. Now when you already have a minus in front, you can go ahead and just change that to a positive when you're writing your subtraction symbols, or you can write it as a minus negative like I did here, because we know that minus negative is really plus positive. Either way you want to work through it. 5 minus 2 gives me 3. Negative 7d minus 5d gives me negative 12d. I really do encourage you guys to check your addition and subtraction with your calculator. 3d squared plus 1d squared gives me 4d squared. I already have a symbol connecting these two terms, but I need to put a plus sign to connect the last term.